covered the election in 2000, when I covered the election in 2000, and in 2000 we didn't know the result for a month. And so I was expecting, well, maybe about 3 or 4 in the morning, I might have a result. But this was crazy. It's like we had a result by 11 a.m. So I'm like, okay, I'll go home and do my blog post. As I'm walking back, all of a sudden I hear all of this cheering and chanting. And I go down to the center of Washington. And this was 14th Street. And I could look all the way up to U Street, which was the historic Black District in Washington. Now, I was based in Washington for 7 years with the BBC, so that was my hometown for a long time. And Washington is a very, very, very segregated city. You know, it's like, I'm a white guy, I live here, black people live over there, Latinos live over there, you know, but they don't actually meet too much, except in Evans Morgan where I live. And I knew how segregated it was. This was amazing to me. So 14th Street is crammed with cars, and the way that I put it, it's like a Benetton ad on ecstasy. Everybody was, I mean, it was kind of the melting pot nation. All people from all kinds of races, I mean, high-fiving me, you know. I saw Latinos, I saw Asian people, I saw white people. It's like the whole myth of America about how we're all just happy, we all get along, yeah, it's a myth. We don't really do that. But that one night we did, right? So I'm on 14th Street, just kind of sucking this all in, and then I, you know, trying to start getting back because I've got a deadline to meet. And everybody says, man, the real party's down at the White House. Okay. And all the time, it's great, because I'm posting to Twitter. It's sucked into our politics blog directly, so I'm still filing. You know, I can tell my editor, I'm still doing work. So I show up at the White House, it's 2 in the morning. There are a couple thousand people out there, you know, chanting, to George Bush, who's still in the White House, na 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 na, hey hey hey, goodbye. One of the most retweeted messages I posted. So one of the tweets that I posted, and it just kind of ricocheted across the world of my entire trip, was a chant that I heard outside the White House, where you had people saying, "Whose house? Whose house? Obama's house! Obama's house!" And that just ricocheted across the world. And again, this was my dream as a journalist. I don't have to lead the story, because this helps me. I can post video, I can post pictures, I can post Twitter. This is what it allowed me to do. And the funny thing is, I know a reporter from Deutsche Welle who did the same thing when there was protests here in Georgia last year. So, I mean, this is not just a, you know, Washington, D.C. sort of first world device. This is almost anywhere. And again, SMS messages to Twitter, doesn't matter. You don't have to be online to use Twitter. And that's what makes it really powerful. Now, I said that one of the most important steps in all of this was really a philosophical step. It was opening up to the audience and just kind of making myself available. So, when I started on this trip, I started off in California. And I have to say, I knew the economy was bad. I knew the housing crisis was bad. I had no idea how bad. So I arrived in California, and I see these mansions that are just stocked. They don't have any more money to build this, you know, huge house that's like the size of this place, right? Because they've run out of money. I was floored. There were foundations laid in the desert for new houses, stopped. There's no money to build them. So I was really surprised about this. So I wrote a bit of a blog post saying, you know, this is kind of taking me aback. I was kind of surprised to see this. And somebody reached out to me, Ralph Torres, and he lived in Riverside, California. His father was in the real estate business, so he sold houses, and had done for 30, 40 years. And he said, look, my father just died last year, we're still in the real estate business, I've never seen it this bad. And he said, you've got to come out to Riverside to see ground zero of the housing crisis. So I said, okay, I can do that. So I went out, and Ralph Torres gave me a foreclosure tour of his neighborhood, and showed me, just on his block, the 5 houses that were foreclosed. Now the interesting thing is, Ralph started following me on Twitter at the beginning of my trip, at, you know, sort of mile 350 out of 4,000. And he followed me the rest of the trip. And that wasn't just Ralph, it was other people who I met at blogger meetups, who I interviewed because they were political bloggers. And so every step of the way, I brought people with me and brought people with me along the story. And at the end, again, one of the moments I had was standing outside the White House, being able to report with my mobile phone. This was the other moment where I said, yeah, okay, this works. Where he said, big thanks to Guardian USOA, that's me, for last month's visit and for pulling me into the conversation, further into the conversation. That's what my job is as a social media journalist, is to pull people into the story. You know, maybe they don't see how it affects them, but by having a conversation with them, by personalizing that story, by having that personal connection, I pull them into a conversation about an election, about something that's going to affect their lives. So now I said, I use lots of different tools, and at the end I kind of used Facebook, Twitter, and blogs and podcasts. And those were my main sites in the Facebook group. So how did I decide which tools to use? One was, where was the conversation? So where were people already talking? Instead of sort of saying, well, okay, I've set up a blog, this is my blog, okay, everybody, come talk to me. I actually went out and just engaged with them wherever they were talking, whether that was on Facebook or on Twitter, or people who were leaving comments on my Flickr picture. And I think that's one of the biggest changes when it comes to the web, is, 10 years ago we set up a website, 5 years ago we set up a blog. We're like, yep, we're on the web, we're ready for business. Now, that blog, that website is plugged into all of these services. And that's really what's driving it. So at The Guardian, we actually get more traffic coming to our Guardian technology section through Twitter than we do through Google News. People just sharing our stories on Twitter drives more traffic to our tech section than any other referral. So go to where the conversation was. Where was the best response? Where did people actually talk to me? Because one of the things that I found really interesting is, and it was a little frustrating too, is people would leave comments on my blog posts, but they would talk to me a lot more readily on Facebook or Twitter, because that's where they were used to engaging. A lot of the audience on The Guardian were still sort of getting them involved in the conversation, but I didn't have to work very hard to get people to ask me questions and get involved in Twitter. And what helped me to achieve, that should be achieved instead of whatever that word is, my goals best. And again, some of that was engagement, some of that was about conversation, some of that was what worked best with this, because this is what I had to use most of the time. So that's, a lot of editors come to me and they say, we want to do something with Twitter. I said, what do you want to do? They said, we don't know, we just want to use Twitter. I said, no. What do you want to do? Step back and think what you're trying to do first. And then think about what tools help you do that. So maybe it's Twitter. Maybe it's Facebook. Maybe it's a local service that I don't know about. But think about what you're trying to achieve first. Figure out what those individual tools bring to what you can achieve with those tools, and then pick from that toolbox. So I'll leave you with one last example. This is my little British election project. So the election was just held on Tuesday. Now, actually, I just left The Guardian last Wednesday. I'm one of about 50 or 60 people who took a buyout, and now I'm going on to other projects. So I thought, I still want to do something for the election. So my wife, who's sitting in the front row, and I, we were kind of complaining at the TV, like most consumers of media, about a month ago. We were saying, you know what? All of this political coverage, it's really personality driven. So there was a new book out by actually an author, Andrew Lonsley, who writes for The Guardian Sunday paper, The Observer. And for about a week, the media was obsessed because the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, has a temper. He yells at his staff. He's a Prime Minister. If he didn't have a temper, I'd be a bit surprised. They're all a little, that way. But this obsessed the media for an entire week. And I said to myself, okay, wait a minute. The UK is barely out of a recession. We owe everybody and their brother money. Nobody trusts MPs because they just disgraced themselves with expenses. And the story that obsessed the media for a week is whether or not Gordon Brown shouts at his staff. Now that to me seems a little stupid. So why don't we talk about issues? So I said to we got to do something about this. So I reached out to a friend of mine who runs a e-government consultancy, and I said, Don, there's something we got to do to get people to talk about issues. Why don't we do this? And so we set up a blog. We've got a hashtag on Twitter, Talk Issues. We set up a Facebook group. And every time the media kind of goes down this rat hole of sort of talking about personalities, is there any way that we can get them kind of pushed back to talk about issues?